"Make me your wife for just tonight," said the Apache woman, and what happened next changed everything. The sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows over the rugged desert, when John stumbled along the dusty trail. His clothes were torn, his boots coated in a thick layer of sand and dirt, and his lips were cracked from thirst. For days he had traveled alone, moving from one sparse settlement to another, looking for work or even just a friendly face. The harsh winter had taken everything from him. His home had been destroyed, his family gone. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, and yet he kept moving, driven by a stubborn hope that somewhere, someone might offer him shelter or kindness. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving. Cacti with sharp needles grew in small clusters, and rocks jutted out from the ground like the bones of some long-dead giant. The wind blew hot and dry, carrying the scent of dust and distant wildfires. John's stomach growled, and he realized he hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. Water was even scarcer. He had a small canteen, but it was nearly empty, and the thought of finding a clean stream or river seemed almost impossible. He paused for a moment, leaning on his walking stick, and looked around, trying to find any sign of life. It was then that he saw smoke rising in the distance. His heart leapt. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. Perhaps they had food, water, or at least a place to rest for the night. He quickened his pace, limping over rocks and sand until he reached a small clearing near a riverbank. There, by a modest fire, sat a woman. She was unlike anyone John had ever seen. Her skin was the color of warm earth, her dark hair braided neatly, and her eyes shone with intelligence and strength. She wore simple clothing made of soft leather, decorated with small, intricate patterns that told of her heritage. She was tending to the fire and appeared calm, but there was something about her presence that made John pause. She was alert, aware of every movement, as if the desert itself obeyed her commands. "Hello," John said cautiously, raising his hand. He did not want to startle her, but the exhaustion in his voice betrayed him. I'm looking for water, food, maybe a place to rest." The woman looked at him carefully, her gaze sharp yet curious. She didn't speak immediately. Finally, she said in a clear, calm voice, "Sit. But first tell me your name." "John," he replied, "John Miller." He lowered himself to the ground, keeping his distance. "And you?" "I am Iana," she said. Her voice had a rhythm that made it almost musical. "I have food and water. You may share them, but only if you respect this place." John nodded eagerly. Hunger and thirst made it easy for him to agree to anything. He watched as Ayana handed him a small piece of dried meat and a pouch of water. The first sip was like drinking life itself. He drank slowly, savoring every drop, then took the meat, chewing carefully. As he ate, he noticed the strength in her movements, the careful way she handled the fire, the way she watched the surrounding land with constant attention. She seemed part of the desert, as if she belonged to it in a way John could never understand. He realized he was not just hungry and tired, he was also deeply curious about her. After a while, as the sky turned a deep orange and the first stars appeared, Ayana looked at him and said something that made John freeze. "Make me your wife for just tonight." He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. His mind raced. Who was this woman? Why would she say such a thing? And yet there was no malice in her eyes, only an urgent seriousness that made him hesitate. "Just tonight?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," she replied. "For tonight we are one, but it is not just about companionship. There is a reason. You will understand if you trust me." John swallowed hard. He had never met anyone like her. His life had been full of loss, fear, and loneliness, but here was someone daring to offer connection in the most unexpected way. He felt a mix of fear, disbelief, and an odd sense of relief. He realized that he had nothing to lose. The desert could take his life at any moment, and the kindness and courage in her offer felt like a chance to survive, and perhaps even to understand something new about life. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said, I will trust you. Yana's expression softened slightly. She gestured toward a sheltered spot near the fire. "We will stay here tonight, but we must be careful. The desert is not always kind, and some people do not respect life as we do." The night settled around them, cold and quiet, with only the occasional rustle of wind through the sparse trees and the distant call of a coyote. John and Ayana sat near the fire, sharing the warmth and watching the flames dance. She began to speak, telling him stories of her life and her tribe, of the dangers they faced, of the ways they survived. Her words painted pictures in John's mind of a world so different from his own, yet filled with courage, intelligence, and beauty. He listened, captivated, and gradually began to speak of his own life. He told her about the harsh winter that had destroyed his family and home, about the endless search for work and safety, and about the loneliness that had followed him across the desert. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of connection, a bond that went beyond mere survival. As the hours passed, the initial awkwardness faded. They laughed quietly over small stories, shared observations about the stars above, and even managed to find comfort in each other's presence. John began to understand that Ayana was not asking him to be her husband simply for desire. There was a purpose, a wisdom in her words. She saw something in him, a kindness and honesty that she needed in this moment, a human connection that transcended fear and danger. Eventually, exhaustion overcame them. They rested near the fire, the warmth of the flames and the calm presence of each other providing a rare sense of safety. John felt a strange gratitude. He had expected the night to be frightening, uncertain, and lonely, but instead it became a night of learning, trust, and quiet understanding. In the middle of the night, John woke to find Ayana staring at the stars. "The desert teaches us many things," she said softly. "It teaches us patience, courage, and the importance of trust. We must respect it, or it will not forgive." John nodded, feeling a connection not just to her, but to the world around him in a way he had never experienced. That night he realized that survival was more than finding food or water. It was about understanding, empathy, and trust. By morning, the first light of dawn painted the desert in soft shades of gold and pink. John looked at Ayana, seeing her not just as a stranger, but as someone who had offered him something far greater than safety, understanding, companionship, and a glimpse of hope. He did not yet know what the next days would bring, but he felt ready to face them. As they prepared to move along the river, sharing the small water and food they had, John understood that this night had changed something inside him. He had entered the desert as a man alone, fearful and broken, but he left it with a sense of purpose, a newfound respect for the strength of another human being, and the awareness that one night, one small act of trust, could alter the course of a life. The desert was still harsh, and the journey ahead uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, John felt hope. And beside him, walking with a calm confidence and quiet strength, was Ayana, the woman who had dared to ask for something as simple, yet as profound, as trust for one night. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting warm golden light across the rocks and sand. John awoke to the soft sound of water trickling from the river nearby, and the faint rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. He rubbed his eyes and turned to see Ayana already awake, moving gracefully near the fire. She was preparing a small breakfast of dried meat and river herbs, carefully arranging them on a flat stone. Her movements were calm, precise, and full of a quiet confidence. John watched her for a moment, realizing that she was unlike anyone he had ever met. Her presence was strong yet comforting, and he felt a strange mix of awe and gratitude. "Good morning," he said softly, careful not to startle her. Ayana looked up and smiled, the faintest curve of her lips. "Good morning, John. Did you sleep well?" "I did," he replied honestly. "Better than I have in a long time, thank you." "You are welcome," she said simply. Then, as if remembering something important, she added, "Today, you will learn more than you realize. The desert is not just land, it is a teacher." John nodded, unsure what she meant but trusting her instinctively. After finishing the small meal, they packed what little they had and prepared to travel along the river. The morning air was crisp, and the path was slightly easier than the rough trail he had walked the day before. Yet John could feel the tension of the desert still around them. He knew danger could appear without warning from wild animals, hostile people, or even the harsh elements themselves. As they walked, Ayanna began to speak, her voice steady and calm. "Many settlers think the desert is empty, lifeless," she said. "They do not see what lives here, what survives here. We learn to notice the smallest signs, a footprint, a broken branch, the movement of a bird. The desert speaks, but only if you listen." John listened intently. He had traveled across the frontier, but he had never thought about the land in such a way. To him, the desert had always been something to survive, a challenge to overcome. But Ayanna made it feel alive, almost magical. He began to look more closely at the ground, noticing small tracks of animals and the way the wind had shaped the sand. "You must always be aware," she continued. "A person who forgets this may not last long here. The desert does not forgive carelessness." They walked for hours, occasionally stopping to drink from the river and rest in the shade of small trees or rocks. During these breaks, Ayanna taught John how to find edible plants, how to track animals, and even how to start a fire without matches. John was amazed at how much knowledge she possessed. It was practical, precise, and came from experience, not just books. He realized that survival in this world required intelligence, patience, and respect for nature, and that Ayanna had mastered all three. At one point, John asked about her life before she came to the desert. Ayanna paused, looking toward the horizon, as if seeing distant memories in the sky. "I grew up with my people," she said finally. "We were taught to respect the land, to care for each other, to survive with honor. But life is not always safe. Sometimes, danger comes without warning and you must be ready." John nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He understood more clearly now why she had asked him to trust her the night before. This was not just a woman seeking companionship. She was someone who had faced hardship, danger, and loss, and she knew the importance of choosing carefully whom to trust. As the sun climbed higher, the heat began to press down on them. John felt sweat running down his back, and he was grateful for the shade of a large boulder where Ayanna suggested they rest. She sat cross-legged, quietly observing the river, while John drank water and wiped his brow. "You are stronger than you think," Ayanna said softly. "The desert tests everyone. It tests patience, courage, and honesty. You have survived because you have these qualities, even if you do not yet see them." John felt a warm sense of pride, mingled with humility. He had never thought of himself as particularly brave, but Ayanna's words made him realize that he had survived much more than he had believed. Her confidence in him gave him a new sense of purpose. As the day went on, they reached a narrow canyon, the walls of stone rising high on either side. The path was rough, and John had to use his hands to steady himself on the rocks. Ayanna moved ahead effortlessly, guiding him and showing him the safest route. At one point, a small rockslide occurred and John froze in fear. But Ayanna remained calm, instructing him where to step and how to avoid danger. Her calm presence reassured him, and together they passed safely through the canyon. That night they made camp in a small sheltered area near a natural spring. Ayanna began to build a fire while John helped gather wood and small branches. Once the fire was burning brightly, she handed him a cup of water and a small portion of food. They sat quietly, listening to the sounds of the night, the rustling of animals, the whisper of wind through the rocks, and the gentle flow of the spring. "You see," Ayanna said, breaking the silence, "even at night the desert is alive. Every sound has meaning, every movement tells a story. You must listen, watch, and learn. Only then can you truly understand it." John nodded. He had begun to see the desert differently now, not just as a place to survive, but as a teacher and a companion. And he realized that he had begun to understand Ayanna as well, not just as a stranger, but as someone brave, intelligent, and strong in ways he had never imagined. As the fire burned low, they shared stories of their lives. John spoke of his family, the loss he had suffered, and the loneliness that had followed him across the frontier. Ayanna listened, her eyes thoughtful, nodding occasionally. Then she told him about her tribe, the challenges they faced, and the lessons she had learned from her people. Her words were vivid and full of life, painting a picture of a world that John had never truly seen. By the time the fire had died down, John felt a sense of connection he had not felt in years. This night was not just about survival. It was about understanding, trust, and learning from someone whose life was so different from his own. He realized that he was beginning to care for Ayanna, not just as a companion for a single night, but as a person whose courage and wisdom he respected deeply. As they lay down near the fire, wrapped in blankets to protect against the cool desert air, Ayanna spoke softly. "Tonight you will sleep, but remember what you have learned today. The desert teaches through experience. It is not enough to see, you must understand, you must feel it." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He had learned more in one day than he had in months of wandering, and he knew that the journey ahead would teach him even more about the desert, about survival, and about the strength of the human spirit. Before sleep took him fully, John looked at Ayanna, noticing the quiet determination in her face and the calm wisdom in her eyes. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for her guidance and presence. For the first time in a long while, he felt safe, not just from the dangers of the desert, but in the knowledge that he was not entirely alone. The night passed quietly, the desert holding its secrets, as if acknowledging the bond that had begun to form between them. John dreamed not of fear or loss, but of learning, growth, and trust. He dreamed of the river, the canyon, and the wide, open sky, and he realized that the desert had already begun to change him. Morning came again, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. John woke feeling stronger, more alert, and more aware of his surroundings. Ayanna was already awake, preparing the small breakfast again, moving with the same calm confidence as the day before. "Ready to continue?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Yes," John replied. "I want to learn more." And with that, they set out again, moving along the river, side by side. The journey was long and challenging, but John no longer felt the same fear and desperation he had carried before. With Ayanna by his side, he felt capable of facing the desert, the unknown, and whatever challenges lay ahead. For John, this day had changed everything. He had entered the desert as a man alone, fearful and uncertain, but he was beginning to leave it as someone willing to trust, to learn, and to see the world through a new, wiser perspective. And beside him walked Ayanna, the Apache woman who had dared to ask for trust, understanding, and companionship, even if just for a night. The sun was high in the sky when John and Ayanna stopped near a small cluster of rocks to rest. The day had been long, and the heat of the desert pressed down on them. John wiped the sweat from his brow and drank water from his canteen, feeling grateful for every drop. Ayanna sat nearby, scanning the horizon with a careful, watchful gaze. There was a seriousness in her eyes today that John had not seen before, a quiet intensity that made him wonder what weighed on her mind. After a moment of silence, she spoke softly. "John, there is something you should know, something about why I am traveling alone." John looked at her, curious and alert. "What is it?" he asked. Ayanna's gaze did not waver. "I am fleeing danger," she said simply. "Not all people here mean well. Some want to harm me or my tribe. That is why I have been careful, why I asked you to trust me last night. I cannot explain everything, but I want you to understand that survival is not easy for any of us." John felt a shiver run down his spine, but it was not fear of her words. It was the weight of what she carried, the quiet bravery in her voice and the truth in her eyes. He realized that the trust she had asked of him was not just for a moment of companionship, it was for something much deeper. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Why trust me?" Yana paused. "Because I see something in you. You have kindness, courage, and honesty. You listen and observe. You do not judge. These qualities are rare, especially in strangers. That is why I chose to ask you, even though it was risky." John felt both honored and nervous. He had never been seen in such a way before. Most people judged him by his appearance, his situation, or his lack of possessions. But Ayanna saw him for who he truly was, and that realization made him want to rise to the trust she had placed in him. As they continued their journey along the river, Ayanna began to share more about her life and the dangers she had faced. She spoke of rival groups that had threatened her tribe, of travelers who had turned violent, and of settlers who did not understand the delicate balance of life in the desert. John listened closely, absorbing every word. He realized that her world was not just about survival in nature. It was about navigating a web of human relationships, alliances, and dangers. "There are those who do not respect life," Yana said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "They see the world as theirs to take without care for others. That is why I must be careful, why I cannot always trust easily. And that is why you must understand the responsibility of trust. It is not given lightly." John nodded. He had always thought of danger as something physical, storms, animals, accidents. But now he understood that danger could also come from people, from intentions, from choices that could hurt or protect. He realized that being alive in this land required both strength and wisdom. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they found a sheltered area under a large rock formation. The shade was welcome, and they rested while Ayanna prepared a small meal. John helped by gathering wood for the fire, trying to learn from her every movement, every careful gesture. He noticed how she selected the driest wood, how she arranged it to catch the wind for proper flame, and how she kept an eye on the surroundings even while cooking. It was a lesson in focus, patience, and skill. "Why did you leave your home?" John asked, curiosity mixed with caution. Yana looked at the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. "It was not safe. My people faced threats that we could not ignore. I had to leave to protect myself and others. Leaving is never easy, but sometimes it is necessary. Life demands difficult choices." John understood the weight of her words. He had lost his family and home, but he had not had to make such a choice for the safety of others. The courage it must have taken to leave, to walk alone into uncertainty, filled him with respect and admiration. The evening grew cooler, and John and Ayanna sat quietly by the fire. The stars began to appear, scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns. The desert at night was both beautiful and intimidating, a vast expanse that seemed to hold secrets in every shadow. "You will learn much from these nights," Ayanna said softly. "The desert teaches in ways you may not expect. It teaches patience, awareness, and respect. It teaches you to trust and to observe. Only then can you survive, not just in body but in spirit." John listened, feeling a deep sense of understanding. He had already learned so much in just 2 days about the land, about survival, and about trust. And yet he knew there was more to learn, more challenges ahead. As they sat together, Ayanna began to teach John about the practical skills that had kept her alive. She showed him how to identify edible plants along the riverbank, how to read animal tracks to predict movements, and how to find water in unexpected places. She explained the importance of moving quietly and observing signs that most people would overlook. John was a quick learner, eager to absorb every lesson. He realized that these skills were not just about survival. They were about understanding the world, reading it carefully, and making choices that respected both nature and people. With each passing hour, he felt a growing admiration for Iana's knowledge and resilience. Later, as the fire burned low, Iana spoke of her hopes and fears. "I want to protect my people, to survive and help others survive. But the world is not always fair. We must act with courage, even when we are afraid. That is the only way to live with honor." John felt her words deeply. He understood that her courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. He thought of his own life, the fear, the loss, the loneliness, and realized that he had begun to find strength in unexpected places. Iana's presence, her trust, and her wisdom had begun to change him. The night deepened, and the desert became quiet, save for the occasional rustle of small animals and the distant call of a coyote. John and Iana lay down near the fire, the blankets keeping them warm against the cool night air. "John," Iana said softly, "tonight you have learned not just about survival but about trust. Trust is a choice, and it is not always easy. You must decide whom to trust and how far that trust can go. That is the most important lesson." John nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He realized that the night had not just been about the physical challenges of the desert, but about the emotional and moral lessons that would guide him in the days to come. As he drifted into sleep, he thought about the journey so far. He had entered the desert as a man alone, uncertain and weary, but he was beginning to leave it with knowledge, courage, and a connection that went beyond survival. Iana had taught him that life was not just about enduring hardships, but about learning from them, about trusting wisely, and about finding strength in the presence of others. The fire burned low, casting a warm glow over the rocks, and John dreamed not of fear or loneliness, but of growth, understanding, and partnership. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he felt ready to face it with Iana by his side, sharing her wisdom, courage, and trust. By dawn, John awoke to the soft light of morning, the desert once again painted in gold and pink. He felt stronger, more alert, and more aware of his surroundings. Iana was already awake, preparing the small breakfast with her usual calm confidence. "Are you ready to continue?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Yes," John replied. "I am ready to learn more." As they packed their belongings and began to walk along the river once again, John felt a deep sense of purpose. He had entered the desert unsure of himself, fearful of what lay ahead. Now he felt capable, alert, and connected not just to the land but to Iana and to the lessons she was teaching him. The day stretched before them, long and challenging, but John no longer felt fear. With each step, he felt the bond between them grow stronger, the trust they had begun to build solidifying in the quiet moments of shared struggle and learning. He understood now that survival was not just about strength, but about wisdom, trust, and understanding. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the desert sands, John realized something he had not thought possible a few days ago, that even in a harsh, unforgiving land, human connection, courage, and trust could bring hope, safety, and a sense of belonging. And in that moment, he knew that the journey with Iana was not just about survival. It was about discovering a life he had never imagined, one step at a time. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon when John and Iana reached a narrow valley. The desert, which had seemed calm and forgiving that morning, now appeared more threatening. Shadows stretched long across the rocky ground, and the air was thick with tension. John felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. He had learned much from Iana, but he also understood that the desert could change suddenly, and danger could appear without warning. Iana walked ahead, moving gracefully over uneven rocks, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. John followed closely, trusting her instincts. They had traveled together for several days now, and he had begun to rely on her guidance as much as his own instincts. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, every glance purposeful. He admired her strength and confidence, and he felt grateful that she had chosen to trust him. As they entered a narrow passage between two large rock formations, Ayanna suddenly stopped. She crouched low and motioned for John to do the same. "We are not alone," she whispered, her voice calm but urgent. "I see signs. People have passed this way recently." John's heart quickened. He had known that danger was always possible, but hearing it confirmed made him tense. "What should we do?" he asked quietly. "Stay close," she said. "Watch and listen. Move slowly." They crept forward, carefully stepping over loose stones and avoiding dry twigs that could snap underfoot. John marveled at Ayanna's awareness. She pointed out subtle footprints in the sand, slight disturbances in the brush, and even the sound of a bird taking flight that indicated someone approaching. He realized that she had trained herself to notice every detail of her environment, a skill he had never developed but now deeply respected. Suddenly, a small group of men appeared at the far end of the passage. They were armed and looked hostile, their expressions wary and suspicious. John's heart pounded in his chest. He instinctively moved closer to Ayanna, feeling both fear and trust in equal measure. "Stay calm," Ayanna whispered. "We will not fight unless we must. We can move quietly and avoid them." John nodded, his hands trembling slightly. He followed her lead as they edged along the side of the rock formation, keeping low and out of sight. Every step required focus and careful balance. The men paused, speaking quietly to each other, and John could feel the tension in the air. One wrong move could give them away, but Ayanna remained steady, guiding him with subtle gestures and whispered instructions. After what felt like an eternity, they managed to slip past the men without being seen. John let out a quiet sigh of relief, his body relaxing slightly. Ayanna glanced at him and nodded, a small smile of reassurance on her face. "You are learning," she said softly. "Trust your senses, move with purpose, and the desert will protect those who respect it." They continued along the valley, the danger behind them, but John felt a new sense of awareness. The desert was no longer just a landscape. It was a teacher, a protector, and sometimes a warning. Every rock, every shadow, every sound held meaning, and he was beginning to understand how to read it. As they walked, Ayanna began to speak more about her past. She told John about her family, the values her people held, and the challenges they had faced. She spoke of loyalty, courage, and the importance of protecting those who could not protect themselves. John listened intently, feeling a growing respect for her and the life she had lived. "You have taught me more than I could have imagined," John said quietly. "Not just about survival, but about courage, trust, and understanding." Ayanna smiled faintly. "And you have shown me that trust can exist, even in unexpected places. That is a lesson I needed as well." As the sun began to set, they found a small cave to rest for the night. The opening faced the river, providing both shelter and access to water. Ayanna built a fire carefully, using the knowledge she had shared with John over the past days. The flames cast a warm glow, reflecting off the rocks and illuminating their small shelter. John sat quietly, feeling the weight of the day and the lessons he had learned. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, yet he felt stronger and more confident than ever. He realized that much of this strength came from Ayanna's guidance and trust, and from the bond that had formed between them. "That was close today," John said finally, breaking the silence. "I don't know if I could have done it without you." Ayanna shook her head gently. "You could have. You are stronger than you think." "But it is not just strength that matters, it is understanding, patience, and trust. You have these qualities. That is why you survived." As night fell, they sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal of dried meat and water. The stars appeared above them, countless points of light in the vast desert sky. John felt a sense of peace, a rare moment of calm in the midst of uncertainty. He realized that the desert, which had once seemed harsh and unforgiving, had become a place of learning, reflection, and connection. "You know," John said quietly, "I never imagined I would meet someone like you in this desert. someone so strong, wise, and kind. Yana looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Life is full of surprises," she said softly, "and sometimes trust leads us to the people we need most. Even in the harshest places, there is connection, understanding, and hope." They spoke quietly for hours, sharing stories, lessons, and dreams. John told Ayanna about his past, the family he had lost, and the hardships he had endured. Ayanna listened patiently, offering comfort and insight without judgment. Then she shared more about her tribe, the traditions she cherished, and the dangers she had faced. John began to understand not just her words, but her courage, her resilience, and the strength that had allowed her to survive alone in the desert. As the fire burned low, John felt a growing sense of admiration and respect for Ayanna. She had taught him more than survival skills. She had shown him the importance of trust, courage, and understanding. He realized that the bond they had formed went beyond friendship or companionship. It was a connection built on shared experience, respect, and mutual support. Night deepened, and the desert became quiet except for the gentle rustle of the wind and the occasional call of a distant animal. John and Ayanna lay down near the fire, wrapped in blankets to protect against the cool night air. The desert was still and the stars shone brightly above them. "John," Ayanna said softly, "tomorrow will bring new challenges, but remember what you have learned today. Trust yourself, trust the desert, and trust those who have earned it. That is how we survive, not just in body but in spirit." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He understood that the night had not just been about avoiding danger, but about learning to act with awareness, courage, and wisdom. He had faced fear and uncertainty, and he had come through it stronger, more confident, and more connected to Ayanna and the world around him. As he drifted into sleep, John thought about the journey ahead. He knew the desert would continue to test them, presenting obstacles, challenges, and perhaps danger. But he also knew that he had learned valuable lessons of trust, patience, courage, and understanding. And he knew that with Ayanna by his side, he could face whatever came next. Morning came again, painting the desert in soft shades of gold and pink. John awoke feeling alert, strong, and ready. Ayanna was already preparing their small breakfast, moving with her usual calm confidence. "Are you ready to continue?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Yes," John replied. "I am ready to face whatever comes." They packed their belongings and set out once again, moving along the river with careful steps and watchful eyes. John felt a growing sense of purpose, a confidence that had been absent before he met Ayanna. The journey was still long and uncertain, but he knew he was not alone. As they walked, John reflected on the past days, the lessons he had learned, the trust they had built, and the bond that had formed. He realized that the desert had changed him, not just in skill but in spirit. He had learned to see the world differently, to respect it, and to value the strength and courage of those around him. By the time the sun began to set again, John and Ayanna reached a small plateau overlooking the river. The view was breathtaking. The water sparkled in the fading light, and the desert stretched endlessly in all directions. John felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the beauty of the land, but for the journey he had shared with Ayanna. He knew that the challenges ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that together, they could face them. The trust, understanding, and courage they had developed would guide them through whatever obstacles lay ahead. And he realized that this journey was not just about survival, but about learning, growing, and discovering the strength within themselves and each other. The morning sun broke over the desert, spilling golden light across the rugged landscape. John woke to the sound of birds calling and the gentle ripple of the river beside them. He felt the cool morning air against his face and a sense of calm he had not known in weeks. Beside him, Ayanna was already awake, quietly tending to the fire they had built for warmth. Her movements were calm, careful, and purposeful, a rhythm John had grown used to over the past days. "Good morning," he said softly. Yana looked up, her dark eyes bright with focus. "Good morning, John. Today may bring challenges, but you are ready. We are ready." John nodded. The journey had been long and difficult, but he felt stronger, wiser, and more confident than he had when he first entered the desert. He had learned to read the land, to notice subtle signs, to survive, and most importantly, to trust and rely on someone else. His connection with Ayana had grown deeper than he could have imagined, a bond forged through shared experience, understanding, and respect. After a small breakfast of dried meat and river herbs, they packed their belongings and set off along the river once again. The day was warm, the sun climbing steadily in the sky, and the desert stretched endlessly around them. John walked beside Ayana, feeling a sense of determination and hope he had not felt in years. As they traveled, Ayana began to speak. "John, the journey we have shared is more than survival. It is about learning who we are and what we are capable of. Life tests us in many ways, and how we respond defines us." John listened closely. He had already begun to understand her meaning, but her words gave him clarity. Their journey had been dangerous at times, but it had also been filled with lessons about trust, courage, and human connection. He realized that these lessons were not limited to the desert. They would guide him in life, no matter where he went. Later in the day, as the sun reached its highest point, they came upon a narrow pass. The path was difficult, with loose rocks and steep edges. John moved cautiously, remembering all that Ayana had taught him about balance, awareness, and patience. He felt the weight of the lessons in every step, the knowledge that survival depended not just on strength, but on careful observation and understanding. Suddenly, movement caught their eyes. A small group of men appeared ahead, blocking the path. They looked hostile, their faces hard, and they carried weapons. John felt a spike of fear, but he quickly looked at Ayana. Her calm expression steadied him. "Stay close and follow my lead," she whispered. They moved slowly, quietly, using the shadows of the rocks to stay hidden. John followed her exactly, trusting her instincts completely. Every sound, every movement, every step had meaning. The men paused, looking around, but thanks to Ayana's guidance, they passed without being seen. John's heart raced, but he felt a growing confidence. He realized that he was learning to trust not only her, but also his own awareness and judgment. After the danger passed, they continued along the river, the tension slowly easing. They found a small plateau overlooking a wide stretch of the desert. The view was breathtaking. The river sparkled like silver in the sunlight, and the vast desert stretched endlessly, dotted with rocks and sparse vegetation. John felt a deep sense of gratitude for the beauty surrounding them, and for the journey that had brought him here. As they rested, Ayana spoke again. "John, life is unpredictable. We cannot always control what happens, but we can choose how we respond. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Trust is not easy, but it is necessary." John nodded, understanding her fully now. Their journey had been about much more than survival. It had been about trust, courage, understanding, and the bond they had formed. He felt a growing respect and admiration for Ayana, and a sense of connection that went beyond words. As the day turned to evening, they made camp near a small grove of trees beside the river. The air was cooler, and the soft light of sunset cast long shadows across the ground. They built a small fire and sat quietly, sharing a simple meal. John looked at Ayana, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "You have changed my life," he said quietly. "I came here lost, afraid, and alone, but you taught me courage, trust, and understanding. You helped me see the world differently, and I am grateful." Ayana smiled softly. "And you have shown me trust, respect, and kindness. Sometimes we meet people who change our path in ways we cannot imagine. That is what has happened between us." The fire burned low, and the desert around them became quiet, peaceful, and still. John felt a sense of completion, a feeling that this journey, with all its challenges, lessons, and connections, had transformed him. He understood that he had not only survived physically, but had also grown emotionally and spiritually. Night fell and the stars filled the sky with countless points of light. The desert, which had once seemed harsh and unforgiving, now felt alive, comforting, and full of meaning. John lay beside Ayanna, wrapped in a blanket, reflecting on the journey they had shared. "I never thought a single night could lead to so much," he said softly. "But meeting you, trusting you, learning from you, it has changed everything." Ayanna reached out, gently touching his hand. One night was just the beginning. Life is full of beginnings, each one teaching us something new. What we experienced together was real, and it will guide us always. The next morning they rose early, the first light of dawn spilling across the desert. They packed their belongings and continued along the river, moving with purpose and confidence. John felt a renewed sense of strength and determination. The lessons of the desert, trust, courage, awareness, and understanding, were now part of him, guiding every step. As they traveled, they encountered small challenges, rough terrain, changes in the weather, and the occasional sign of people or animals nearby. Each time, John remembered Ayanna's teachings and his own growing confidence. He felt capable of facing any obstacle, knowing that he could rely on both his skills and their bond. By late afternoon, they reached a small settlement near the edge of the desert. It was a place of safety, with friendly faces, food, and water. John felt a sense of relief, but also a bittersweet feeling. The desert had been harsh, difficult, and unpredictable, yet it had also been a teacher, a test, and a place of connection. Leaving it behind was both a relief and a challenge. Ayanna turned to him, her eyes reflecting pride and warmth. "You have done well, John. You have learned, grown, and survived. But more importantly, you have learned to trust, to observe, and to act with courage. That is the greatest lesson." John nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "I could not have done it without you," he said. "You guided me, trusted me, and taught me more than I could have imagined." They spent the evening in the settlement, resting, sharing stories with the people there, and reflecting on their journey. John realized that the bond they had formed would remain with him forever, shaping the way he saw the world and the people in it. As night fell, John and Ayanna sat together by a small fire, watching the stars. The desert behind them seemed distant now, but its lessons remained vivid in their minds. John understood that their journey had changed everything, not just the way he saw the world, but the way he understood trust, courage, and human connection. "I never thought one night could change a life," John said softly, "but it has. Meeting you, traveling with you, it has taught me more than I could have imagined." Ayanna smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "And it has changed me as well. We learn from each other, grow with each other, and face the world together. That is the meaning of trust and connection." The fire burned low and the desert night was quiet and still. John felt a sense of peace and completeness. He had entered the desert lost, alone, and uncertain. He was leaving it wiser, stronger, and connected, not just to Ayanna, but to the world around him, and to the lessons that life had taught them both. As they prepared to rest, John realized that this journey was more than survival. It was a story of trust, courage, learning, and human connection, and it was a story that would remain with him forever, shaping the rest of his life. He closed his eyes, feeling gratitude, strength, and hope. The desert had tested them, taught them, and changed them. And through it all, one night of trust, one journey of understanding, had transformed two lives, showing that courage, wisdom, and human connection could overcome even the harshest challenges.